Today we're going to go through the Starhawk model rocket made by Quest Aerospace. This is actually a really simple model rocket that can be assembled in about an hour, sometimes less. We won't need a whole lot of extraneous things for this. We will need some sort of a hobby knife like this. If you don't have one of these, a single edge razor blade will also work. You'll also want a pencil. I prefer to use mechanical pencils, but a regular old wooden number 2 pencil works fine. A ruler will also come in handy. Now the instructions here actually have a rule built into the paper, but if you don't want to use a paper ruler and just have another one handy here, I'm just going to be using this small plastic ruler for the assembly of the kit. The last thing you'll need is a little bit of white glue, Elmer's or otherwise. If you have wood glue, that works as well. But wood glue does tend to dry and set just a little bit faster, and so if you're new to model rocketry and need to have a little bit more working time, white glue is going to be the better option for you. All right, they give us a nice parts list here and an illustration of what those look like, and it's a good idea to go through and find these ahead of time. And so one of the first things you'll want to look for, and this may get tangled up in the instructions or lost in one of the other tubes or something like that, but there are 2 shock cords here. One is a narrow yellow one made of Kevlar, and then the other one is a little bit thicker white and made of elastic. You'll need those. Okay. The main body tube, this is the largest tube in the package. And then there is a fin assembly, already pre-made and everything. This is orange. This also has a built-in launch lug here, so if you've built other model rockets before, you'll notice this does not have a separate launch lug. It's built into the fin assembly. And then there's a smaller packet within the package that contains much smaller parts, including the decal that will go on last, the plastic nose cone. This yellow tube here is actually the motor mount, and then we have a motor retaining clip here, and then the last few parts, this is the engine block or thrust ring. We have a streamer, and then this little self-stick tab is what will be used to attach the streamer to the shock cord, so don't lose this little part here. Okay, now we'll start assembling. The first thing you're going to want to do is have some sort of disposable surface on top of whatever your work surface is. So if you're working on a table or a bench or whatever, just put down some newspaper or construction paper or something. I actually used a few pages of a recycled scrapbook. Just have something down so you don't get glue on your table or other working surface. And the first thing we're going to do here, as shown in step 1, is tie the shock cords together. And so you'll want to take the ends of these so they're even. You want about an inch here, about 25 millimeters if you're metrically inclined. And then you're going to put a single overhand knot in these. And you want to leave there about an inch of shock cord ends outside of the knot. And the reason for this is twofold. One is that this helps that knot from coming loose, but also this is going to keep the streamer from sliding too far down the shock cord during the recovery phase of the rocket's flight. Once you've got that tied in, then you can go ahead and just add a little dab of glue onto the ends and onto the knot itself. Okay, so I'm just going to put a little bit in the knot, and that'll just keep it from coming undone. And then we don't want the ends to unravel. We'll put a little glue on those. And then we'll set this aside and let it dry while we do the rest of the rocket. Alright, so we'll open up our instruction page here, turn this around. The next part of this is to assemble the motor mount. And so the first part is the thrust ring here. This is the small blue coated ring, usually blue in most of these kits. It's actually the only ring of this size that we've got in here. So whatever color they made it in your kit, it's going to be the same thing. Now what we're going to do is cut a V-notch in here because this is where the shock cord is going to attach. And this is something that's fairly unique to Quest kits. If you built other rockets, mainly those made by Estes, they have a different shock cord mount. This one mounts the shock cord into the engine mount. And the nice thing about it is it does give you a very strong mount. The disadvantage, and we'll talk more about it later, but there is the possibility of what's called zippering, where the shock cord actually rips through the top of the rocket body during ejection. And that can be solved by simply having a nice long shock cord on there. Alright, so anyway, what we'll want to do is simply cut a notch in here. I'm just going to outline the cuts here, and this should be just a couple of millimeters apart, or about 1/8 of an inch or so. Okay, and then we're going to cut down, and you may find that it's easier to cut downward if you put the ring on its side. And just do a little bit at a time. What we don't want to do is cut completely through the ring. Now, if you do cut completely through the ring, it's not necessarily a showstopper. All you have to do is just cut the notch in the other side of the ring, and then when we glue the thrust ring in, just put a little extra glue on the cut open part, and then that will be all nice and glued together by the time the glue dries. Okay, now you saw over there where the cover came off a little bit. That's not a big deal either. That will also come back down when the glue dries. What this is telling me is I actually need a sharper blade. Okay. So I'm going to cut a little bit more here. And you want this cut to be about halfway through the thickness of the ring. And the idea here is that we need to have enough clearance for the shock cord Kevlar part to go through there. Okay, so now we've got the cut ring, and there's a little bit of fuzz there. That's not a big deal. This is enough to allow us to do the second part. So I'm going to take the other end of my shock cord that's not attached to the elastic. I'm going to wrap this around and first just tie an overhand knot in there. And then I'll pull the knot so that it's up at the edge of the ring here. Okay, and then tie a little bit more. I'm actually going to loosen that. My fingers aren't that small, so I need a little bit more room to make my knot. Just move that around there again. Okay, and now I'm going to make another overhand knot. So I've got a double knot here. And then I'll pull that all the way around so that my knot is actually up here on the edge of the ring, and it's not contributing to the thickness here. Okay, so now if we look at this edge on, the Kevlar cord there is sunk down into the rest of the ring, and that's the way we want it to be. Okay, again here it's a good idea just to put a little bit of glue right on that knot, up here on the end, just to keep things from unraveling. Okay, so the next part we're going to do is to assemble the motor mount tube, and we'll just set that aside. It can dry for a little bit, but it can be applied wet. So here's our motor mount tube. And this one already has a pre-cut slit, and this is going to be where your engine retainer clip goes. And I'm going to go ahead and just put mine in for a dry fit here. And then I'm going to take my thrust ring and make sure that it's fitting okay here. So if that thrust ring should fit in here just like this. And the reason I put my retaining clip in already is to make sure that I don't close this little slit here by shoving in my retaining ring too far. And I'm actually going to turn this around so that the Kevlar is not contributing to the thickness there. Okay, so this actually is sticking out a little bit. If I had done this without the retainer clip in there and shoved that in so it's flush, then when I put my retainer clip in, it's going to hit that mount and I'll have to recut it. Okay, so the instructions actually don't show you this part. It's something I've learned by putting these models together. Alright, so now we're going to take that back apart. And we're just going to put a little bead of glue here on the inside of the motor tube. And this is the end that has the little slit in it. Okay, you don't want to get too sloppy with it, but a healthy amount. You can just take your finger here and spread it all the way around. And what this does is it takes the thrust of the motor and then applies it to the rest of the rocket and keeps the motor from simply shooting up through the rocket when it goes off. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put my clip back in here again to act as a spacing tool. Okay, and again I'm going to put this in. You don't have to do it in this orientation, I just like to, okay, so that my knot is on the opposite side as the clip. Okay, and I'm just going to hold that all together for just a few seconds to let it get a little bit tacky there. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and just leave this together to let it dry. And you might even want to take a little piece of masking tape here and just lightly tack that on. I'm going to let this go ahead and sit and dry for just a few minutes. It doesn't have to dry completely, but I don't want to knock it loose while we're doing the rest of the assembly here. So I'm going to come back in a few minutes, although to you guys it'll look like instantaneous. It's kind of like a cooking show. Okay, a few minutes have passed and we're just going to take this tape off now. And I'm going to briefly remove the clip. We'll be putting that right back in momentarily. Now for this next step, we need to measure a 1/4 inch from the base, or about 6 millimeters for those of you who are metrically inclined. If you don't have a ruler, again, you can use the one that's included in the instructions. So we're just going to make a mark here. And you might even want to extend that around so that you can see it, because it is fairly close to where I put the clip there. But this is going to be the limit of where we want the engine mount to go when we stick it in the body tube. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is take the whole shock cord assembly here and we're going to feed it through the top. And all the way over and pull it now so the knot here just kind of folds over a little bit. If this is still drying, don't pull it too hard. And we're going to put our motor clip back on here. Alright, and then according to the instructions, we're going to add some white glue at the opening of the body tube. So this would be our body tube. We would put white glue right in here, and then eventually we're going to be sliding this in. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a hint of something else you can do. If you have a little dowel or an applicator like this, or even a Q-tip, a Q-tip is long enough to do this. The problem we can run into by putting the glue right here at the end, and then we're going to put this in and have to shove it all the way up to that mark, is if the glue decides to suddenly set somewhere along this length, you may not be able to get the tube in all the way. And so what I prefer to do is stick the glue in about halfway up. Now this does have a little bit of a trade-off. By sticking the glue here and shoving that motor mount all the way in, it gives you a really strong bond, but it does have its pitfalls. So we're going to trade off a little bit of that strength. It's actually much stronger than it needs to be. And so what I'm going to do here is, using my motor mount, is approximate where about halfway up is. Now I'll mark that with my thumbnail here. And now I'm going to apply glue up here to the little cotton applicator part. And you can use a fair amount here. And now I'm going to take my body tube and put this in without touching the sides first where it hits my thumb, and then I'm going to spread it around the inside here. I'm going to pull it out just a little bit. I don't want to come all the way out to the end with the glue. And just set that aside. So now I'll take my whole motor mount assembly here, keep the clip here so that it doesn't move while we're putting this in. And now in one smooth motion, we're just going to put all the way up to our mark there. So we just hide the mark. Okay, and this leaves enough of that clip to bend a little bit here, because eventually this is going to have to bend all the way out of the way to stick a motor in. Okay, at this point we can let this start drying. We can take our shock cord and push it back out. Kevlar is a little bit stiff. It'll go eventually. In fact, sometimes if you can't get the Kevlar to go by itself, start with the elastic part of it, and as soon as it gets back through the thrust ring or motor block there, then we can just feed this all the way through. Okay, so now we have the body tube here with the shock cord assembly coming out the front end where it's supposed to be, and our motor mount here on the back end. The next thing we're going to do is put on the fin assembly. Now remember, part of this fin assembly has the launch lug built into it, and the instructions show to put this on so that the launch lug is about 90 degrees or to the side of the engine retainer clip here. So first I'm just going to do this as a dry fit. Okay, so there's no glue on this yet. And this is how far it needs to go. Okay, so when we actually glue this, we're going to push this all the way up just until we reach the base of the body tube. Okay, now again, this is a case where the instructions are going to have you apply some white glue here in a ring, and then actually put this on with a twisting motion. Okay, like this. And then you just got to kind of make sure that when you can twist back and forth too, that once you get it up here it doesn't make any difference. Basically you just want to make sure that the engine retainer clip is not like this, where it's right next to the launch lug. If you do this, you may end up with the launch lug interfering with the launch rod that's going to pass up through here. Okay, so if you got the white glue, you can do this. I'm going to again give you another alternative, and you can do this or not, but instead of using white glue, you can use some plastic model cement. And this is going to give a better bond to the plastic, but not as strong a bond to the body tube, whereas white glue will be the opposite. It does not bond well to plastic, but it does bond really well to the body tube. So either case, if you're used to working with plastic model cement, you may want to do this. For our purposes today, I'm going to go ahead and use the white glue as the instructions indicate. I am going to do this just a little bit differently though, as I'm going to spread this out a little bit before we put it on. And the reason I'm doing this is I don't want to get glue stuck up into the launch lug. And if you start out with a big blob of glue, you've got a better chance of doing this. This is also why we want to give the fin assembly some twisting action as we put it on, so that if the glue gets pushed ahead, it doesn't all end up in that launch lug. Okay, so now again I'm just going to slide this on and giving a little bit of a twisting motion as we do. Alright, I'm coming up on that clip that I don't want under my launch lug. Okay, I'm just going to turn this back and forth a little bit until I get the position that I want. Okay, and you can see here there might be a little bit of glue that's pushed up ahead of here. If you haven't used too much glue, that shouldn't be too bad. And you can just take your finger and smooth that around. Once the glue dries on the fin set here, one of the things you might want to do is actually apply a little bead of glue all around the circumference here, except in the launch lug, and then smooth that around to form a fillet. And this just provides a better transition between the fin set and the body tube, and might squeak out a few more feet of altitude if you're trying to get this to go as high as you can. Alright, flip over our instructions here. We're almost to the end. The next thing we're going to do is put the streamer on, and for that we need this little stick-on tab. And so find one end of the streamer, and we'll just pull this whole thing out. This is a really lightweight streamer. And then we'll simply peel off this tab. Now be careful, it's got this perforation on there, and you don't want to break that, because this is what's actually going to hold your streamer on. And if it keeps curling like this, just turn it over so you're doing the other side of it. And what we want to do is apply this to the end of the streamer. I'm leaving a little bit of overlap here just to make sure that I don't have any of the sticky part not on the streamer. Okay, and this doesn't have to dry at all. We're just going to pop this little plastic piece out if it's not out on yours already. So now we have a hole in the tab, and now we're going to pass the elastic part through. Now remember, we left quite a lot of length here when we tied a knot in this, and this is to allow this to hold so that it doesn't fall down into the rocket body itself. The last structural piece we have here is the nose cone. Now this is a molded plastic nose cone, and the problem with these is that you always have this stripe here on either side where the mold came together, and you always get a little bit of unevenness here. And it's not a big deal if you want to leave it alone, but if you do want to smooth it out a little bit, one way to do that is with your hobby knife. And this is especially good if you don't plan on painting this, if you're just going to leave it the color that it is in the plastic. Instead of holding this at an angle though, you're going to hold it almost perpendicular and just scrape along that line. And this is going to act to shave it off without gouging into the plastic. You can do this in both directions. Now this is going to leave a slight color difference. If you plan to paint the nose cone, that won't make any difference at all. And in fact, if you do plan to paint the nose, I recommend actually sanding this with some fine sandpaper around 220 grit all the way around. That will help take down the ridge, but it'll also help the paint adhere to the nose cone better. If not, I'm just going to go ahead and scrape this down. It's almost like fingers on a chalkboard sometimes. Okay, but that brings down that edge a little bit. And you can do that more on your own depending on how smooth you want to get this. Now the other thing you want to look at is that those ridges extend all the way down to the shoulder of the nose cone and then down onto the base as well. It's usually not a big problem there, although if your nose cone is feeling very tight when we attach it to the rocket, then you might want to either sand or scrape those down a little bit. Okay, so for our last part, we're going to slip the elastic end of the shock cord through the loop on the nose cone, and we're going to tie a double knot here. Okay, go ahead and pull that nice and taut and move the knot up against the nose cone really well. And then add just a little dab of glue on that again. That'll hold the knot in place once it's completely dry. you don't want to cut this end here completely off at the knot. That's going to make it more susceptible to coming undone. But I will cut this off so that it doesn't interfere with the nose cone going back into the body tube. Okay, so we can let that sit and dry. I'm going to do this a little bit accelerated here. So when we're assembling this, and we're not going to go into everything you need to do prior to launching. The instructions do show you that, but that's something best done right before the launch and actually not while we're building. What I'm going to do here first of all is simply fold the streamer lengthwise over itself several times and then just roll it up here. And then I'm going to gently ease the bottom part of the shock cord down here ahead of it. And that Kevlar is kind of springy, but you can just stuff it in there. And I'm going to put the streamer in, and then I'm just going to loosely coil here the rest of the elastic part of the shock cord. Stuff it in there, and then we fit the nose cone on. Okay, now here you want to make sure that the nose cone is seated firmly, but it doesn't want to be too tight or too loose. You want it just right. Now this is actually too loose here. This is sliding in and out really easily, and if I just give it a little bit of a shake, it pops open. We don't want that because that could happen while it's in flight, which would result in a dangerously unguided rocket. At the same time, we don't want it to be so snug that the ejection charge doesn't push the nose cone off and allow the deployment of the streamer. So in this case, I'm going to add just a little bit of masking tape to this. And probably this won't even require a full circumference. I'm just going to go around about half of the nose to begin with. I'm going to go just below the shoulder. That way my masking tape doesn't show up when the rocket's put together. And before I do anything else, I'm just going to test fit this again. Okay, so that's still a little bit loose. Okay, but enough. So there's a little bit of looseness until it hits the masking tape there. So that's probably good the way it is. So I'll just take my masking tape and just kind of fold this in to keep it out of the way. You could also just trim this off because whatever's down here on the bottom is not contributing to the friction. Okay, so there's our completed rocket. Now again, this has still got some wet glue in pieces, and so I'm going to open this back up once we get off camera and let the whole thing dry completely. And I would suggest letting this dry overnight before you try launching it. The last thing to do is to decorate it. The simplest thing that you can do is take the Starhawk sticker here, and this is one large sticker. In the instructions it actually shows a two-piece sticker, and some of the newer kits are no longer shipping with this. It just has this one big long sticker, and it's meant to go around the body tube about like this. I've not peeled mine off yet. That can go all the way around, and that'll stick on that way. And if you like, that can be your only decoration. You can do it without the stickers. You can apply your own stickers. Okay. Another easy thing to do is to decorate this with permanent markers like Sharpies or magic markers in various ways. If you are adept at spray painting, that's also another option. If you are going to spray paint this, I highly recommend, again, sanding the nose cone to get these ridges off. And then make sure you use a good coat of primer before you put the paint on. I would recommend that you don't paint the fin set. You could, there's no reason why not to, but it's got a really nice smooth finish to begin with, and so painting it becomes kind of superfluous at that point. Instead, you would probably want to mask this off and paint the body tube, possibly paint the nose. You can also use just brushed on paint. It requires a little bit more skill and work to get a nice smooth finish, and you'll want to sand it between a few coats and then hit it with a clear coat afterward. But I've done that as well, and that can result in some pleasing decoration as well. Okay, in the end, it's up to you. Personalize this rocket to make it yours, and I hope you have a good launch with it.